Are you getting me up there? Yeah, you are. Cool. Okay. If I like speak into the mic as if I'm doing it here, that's still fine. Great. And is the lighting like not because it's low? That's the only thing. Is it's not spooky. It's looking alright. White balance. Yeah, yeah. Cool.
Well, that's a great question.
Just entry. I'm gonna leave this mic with you. It's currently muted down here, so you just switch that up when you're ready to start talking.
Do you
to
happen to
everyone.
know, you're putting up Zoom person, do you happen to know where this computer is getting its Okay, I think we're actually in action. Okay, we're running a bit late, so let's get started. And I don't actually need to be on Zoom anymore. All right. Give me 1 second. Okay, so welcome to the AIMC 2023 Industry Panel. And I'm Ollie Bown. I'm an academic from UNSW Sydney. Actually in London for the next 4 months on sabbatical, so very happy to be back in my hometown and home country. And I'll be welcoming our fantastic panel. And this is a session that is technically down to go till 6. I said there's no way we should talk for 2 hours. Thor said, but we have so much to talk about, and the drinks are ready at 6. So if people start making big yawning noises, we'll know to stop. And if people want to say important things about the commercialization of AI and anything that comes up in this session, we'll start a little bit more talking with the panel. We'll move on a little bit more talking, bringing in the whole group. So get your thoughts ready. Wild, provocative, open-ended comments are really welcome. I just wanted to give one bit of contextualization before introducing the panel. That was that I studied here in my master's degree in 2002, 2003, 2004. And just to reflect back on the field and its various journeys and its this particular Southern England version of the narrative of AI and music, we had this very interesting master's course called Evolutionary and Adaptive Systems. There's people in this room that studied that. And there was someone there called Andrew Gartland-Jones, who was a PhD student at the time, who was proving to be really instrumental in organizing, not AI, we were interested in evolutionary computing, but let's just broadly say AI and music activities. And he collaboratively set up a research network called the Live Algorithms for Music Group a few years later. And then sadly, Drew died quite suddenly. I can't remember exactly the circumstances, but he's just sort of at the moment when he set up this network, and that network went on to be really instrumental in my life, and I think in a whole load of activity around Sussex and Goldsmiths and various places that were really important at that time, and went on to inspire the MUME workshop, which I was involved in organising, which then became one of the workshops that unified to form this. So there's a very interesting history coming back to exactly this place, and it's interesting to just reflect and remember Drew, who could have been, you know, such a significant person in this field. Okay, so we've gathered together a panel today to talk about AI, music, and industry, and I think this is a really important thing that we do in any conference, academic conference, increasingly. In many ways, this is an area that's being led more in industry than it is in academia. That's maybe something that's transitioned. We'll get into that subject. So we've brought together a diverse panel. And a little bit last minute, I've actually invited our two keynotes up, and we had a cancellation, which was Anna Cassia, who actually gave her remote presentation earlier, but she was sadly unable to join us because she's ill at the moment. So I'd like to welcome Elaine Chu, who's a professor of engineering in the Department of Engineering and the School of Biomedical Engineering at King's College. An operations researcher and pianist by training, Elaine is a leading authority in music representation, music information research, and music perception and cognition. And Elaine's giving a keynote tomorrow, so we're hoping this is an advert for the keynote rather than a spoiler for the keynote. We'll steer clear of your hot topics. And then I'd like to welcome Samim Winija, who's the CEO and co-founder of Okio Inc., He's a music producer and practitioner in the generative AI field for over a decade, previously at companies like Google AI and Hugging Face, and currently Okio. And I'd like to welcome back CJ Databots, whose bio I don't have here because I only invited him onto this panel last night, but everyone knows CJ already. And then I'd also like to welcome Ryan Groves, who's joining us remotely from Berlin, I think. Yep. So Ryan is the CTO and co-founder of Infinite Album, where he and his team created the first AI-driven composer designed specifically for video games that composes music in real time in response to game events. And he's also one of the directors of the AI Song Contest, which is, many people will know, an international contest for musical arts artists using AI as a creative partner. So welcome to our panel. And with the exception of Ryan, we're all going to share the tri-mic here, which is streaming to Zoom, to the room, and to YouTube all at the same time. So we're going to have to pass around this cumbersome beast. So I'm going to start by actually inviting Ryan to just say a few words about the AI Song Contest, and why you think it's important, why you've devoted your passions to this very interesting project.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this stuff with these amazing panelists. Yeah, so the AI Song Contest is an international contest for musicians and data scientists and producers who are looking to explore AI as a creative partner in creative music. And I think what's really special about the AI Song Contest is, well, a couple of things. First of all, we've had a sort of transparent process the last couple of years. So everybody who submits, they don't just submit a song, they submit a 4-page process document that details what AI models they're using, what sort of data they're using. So we get a really good look into the creative process that most people and most, especially like journalists, don't really get. So I think that, for one, is really a critical thing, is to enable people to understand what it really means to use AI as a creative partner and just how flexible that is and how many different ways you can approach it and how creative you can be just in that process. I think is really interesting, and it's something we want to share a lot more this year. And then the second thing is that it's kind of emerged as a place for transcultural applications of AR. So our winner last year was the boy Benoit, who translated traditional Thai instrument performances to sort of the Western sonic palette, using those AI models that don't require scale, for example. And so that was, his was really like a creative vision where the AI models he was using completely supported that vision, which is why he won. But even our second place team was a team that was sort of trying to recreate or even conserve the Galician tradition of music using AI. So it's really very interesting that a lot of our participants tend to have a very strong cultural angle to it, and partially that comes from the actual rubric that we built that includes culture and ethics in the scoring system. But it also just kind of just emerged from the contest.
So we are seeing, I think now we can clearly start to perceive multiple cultures of AI music practice, and the Song Contest is a good place to witness that and to document it and archive it. Have you seen that transition over the, I think, 4 years that it's been running, the sort of maturation?
Yeah, I would say so. The first year definitely was everybody sort of tried to just fully generate a song and submit these things. The quality level has really changed quite a lot over the last 4 years as well. But yeah, I think we really see people who are leveraging AI as a creative tool, as a creative partner, rather than just trying to supplant the creative process with AI. So that has been the trajectory just have a text prompt and just submit it, which is really not what we're looking for. But yeah, I would say the trajectory has been a lot more integration of AI into the process along the way.
So you're saying that we can't just write a really good prompt and win?
No.
Not even a really good prompt. Okay, take note. Take note. You might need more than the weekend to get this done. Okay, great. So in a very tenuous segue, then I wanted to expand. Actually, I wanted to pick up on a comment that CJ made to me yesterday, which was that GPU power is key nowadays. We sort of all, I mean, I guess at least in some processes, and that you know, the world of industry is potentially the place to be getting that, and you're doing some. I can't wait to see what's going to come out of your work with Harman AI, and I mean, this touches on an incredibly important point about big tech and AI and the way things are going, where a lot of people see a sort of terrifying future where it's, you know, technology in the hands of a few, in the hands of very centralized, controlled corporations or governments or whatever, with actually just good old-fashioned capital being at the heart of this capability, like big money to pay for GPUs to do stuff. Of course, we still have great models and practices that work on phones and laptops and Raspberry Pis. Do you want to comment a bit on where you see that going, CJ, if I dare open that can of worms? And then I'm really welcoming at any point any of our panelists to jump in, including you, Ryan. But I'll hand the mega mic to you.
Yeah. So we're sort of entering into an era where there's a large GPU discrepancy, where a few organizations have, 10,000 plus GPUs, and I think it's important and healthy for those groups to have open source code and models and produce base models that are open source that everyone else can use and build off of. I think Stable Diffusion is like a really cool example of that, where thousands of GPUs were used to train this really big base model that now is the basis of so much other research. And so seeing Meta now move more into open source is nice, and hoping to see like other groups do that. And also at the same time, these big groups with lots of GPUs, hoping to see more like featuring researchers from academia and outside researchers with projects and supporting them with GPUs. That's how Dotabots got started. We were just given AWS credits to start training neural synthesis models. And the other path that you can do if you are GPU starved is to create a startup and apply for 100K in credits and like Amazon, Google, Azure. But on the other hand, if you are working with 1 GPU or 8 GPUs, and the 3090s are like pretty cheap, you get them on eBay used half price, like $1,500. So it's pretty affordable to be doing like 1 GPU training even with like 24 gigabytes of VRAM. And there's so much interesting research you can do that isn't just make a super large base model, but like there's inference and conditioning and there's like endless things you can do.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think there's a lot of creative outlets that one can do downstream, if you want to call it downstream, from large models. That said, obviously, last week we have announcements from Google and UMG and the likes. And I think the scenario that is panning out is, as you kind of framed it, a very late-stage capitalist type of scenario where you have very large players setting up a rigged game, really, which is setting up rules that will benefit them. and that also sort of aims at establishing a set of norms that will shut out a lot of independent and smaller players, and this is obviously done at a mega scale of capital. So that is also going on. So there's a parallel reality here, a situation where absolutely there's a ton of creativity that is happening and can happen with constrained resources. I think in many cases this is actually beneficial for creative hackers, for researchers and so forth. But I think we need to absolutely look at the commercial reality in the eye, where I'm sure that UMG and let's say independent artists have very much objective functions that are at odds together, and this will be not an easy path forward. So maybe just that.
I will pass on this one since it touches on tomorrow's talk.
Oh, that's in tomorrow's talk.
Related.
Okay. I actually don't know how Stability's revenue model works. So I mean, basically, who pays for this massive training? Is it just through subscriptions and yeah? I mean, you know, is it like that massive investment in capital has to be covered, and if we sort of compare to the Google and Facebook models, then you get something amazing for free, and then there's something kind of coming later that draws revenue in other ways, and that can be more or less benign depending on what people think about it. Do people think that there are the kinds of concerns that we have with big platforms, social media platforms, that we might find in the creative production space in the coming decades? I'll jump in, but
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, Stability was in the beginning self-funded by Ahmad, who was had a previous life as a hedge fund guy, already made his tons of millions, and so he just rented 3 years worth of thousands of GPUs on AWS, just like in bulk, and he's like, all right, now I got to fill it. how do I find people to fill it? And sought out a bunch of open source groups and got them on board the cluster. And this is before it really felt like a company. So that's how it started. And Ahmad has tweeted about the Stability's business model. It's like create these open source base models, but then partner with big groups like Disney to make specialized fine tunes.
I guess I'm asking this question of the industry people. Has there been any efforts to look at how little data we can get by with?
Yeah, I think some of the most interesting and exciting areas are in the hacker domain. So, quote unquote, misuse of models, fine tunes. The whole explosion on LoRa, fine tunes, etc., has been absolutely amazing. And from a creative perspective, they often go way beyond what a base model is even remotely known for, capable for. The entire interface layer, which is really very important, has been, I think, pioneered in many ways by distributed open source, hacker creative community, not exclusively, but tremendous kind of distributed creative energy. And that said, also, there's a ton going on beyond just foundation models. There's hundreds of different techniques, interesting things that when you start to look at them as part of integrated creative processes, they become very powerful, even though on their own they might be isolated, not that interesting. So yeah, it's a nuanced landscape I'm seeing.
What's really interesting is like research into fine tuning and like how few examples can you fine tune with. With Stable Diffusion, the Dream Booth, you only need 5 examples. And recently they just came up with Hyperdream Booth, which is a hyper network that learns models from, learns the weights of a fine tune, and it only needs one example. And I think that's incredible.
Yeah. The reason I asked is tomorrow I'll be talking about things with one example. Yes, so it's
There we go, keynote plug. But don't tell us any more than that. Otherwise, everyone's going to be up fresh and early for 9:15. I think, again, I don't know if my segues are hopelessly obvious, but Ryan, you mentioned that you were kind of happy to go into the, I wasn't sure if people want to talk copyright of training data and these kinds of hot issues, but obviously that's where a lot of concerns are focused now, and quite a remarkable number of people from very different disciplines, obviously law, but also from amongst our community and elsewhere, scratching their heads about different international copyright frameworks that are proving very interesting right now. Ryan, did you want to say anything about copyright and training data? And feel free. I've asked everyone to leave their pitch decks at home today, but feel free to tie that into anything to do with Infinite Album and how you're thinking about your project.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been very careful at Infinite Album to not use copyrighted data in any of our training, which requires a lot of effort. It's also was partially just a performance constraint because our composer has to compose in real time. So we ended up using a variety of different types of machine learning models, not just deep learning. And a lot of those don't require large amounts of data. And we're currently working with artists, so we only get, like 3 songs from an artist, and then we have to create this sort of infinite style out of their 3 songs. So it's quite a fun challenge. But I do think that the industry this year is really feeling like we're having sort of another master moment with training data, where people are sort of just using training data without any permission or consent from artists, and that in general is not good if you're leveraging that information for commercial purposes for your own monetary benefit. And then obviously with the whole Big Drake song, the whole idea of publicity rights came out, which is your ownership over your voice, which is not actually copyright, but sort of a very similar problem. So yeah, I think that has sort of, the Big Drake song really sort of shook the industry this year, and pretty much everyone thinks that, Big Drake was completely AI generated, which obviously is not the case. And even with those voice models, as I'm sure many people know, it's really voice transformation. So actually, some human has to sing their impersonation of Drake and then convert the voice into Drake's sound, right? His vocal sound. So yeah, we were on a copyright listening session with the Copyright Office where they actually gathered entrepreneurs and people from the labels and Spotify to discuss, whether or not AI songs should have copyright. And I think it's going to be, first of all, it's very hard to define how much human input is necessary to qualify as a copyright, because people have been using AI or related sort of technologies in the creative process for, 10, 20 years already. But secondarily, if we can't copyright AI-generated music, then even the artists who have given their consent and have created their own AI, their own artistic style, will not actually be able to recoup any of the royalties, because you can't recoup any royalties if it's not copyrightable. So that's a big challenge that, we're sort of facing that. We are more, pro copyright for AI-generated works because we see it more as an extension of the artist, and we can take that stance because we only use artists' content when we have permission from the artists directly, when we're working with them. So yeah, there's quite a lot of moving parts. It also is a little bit different in Europe versus the States, but I think it's a very, very interesting space. And I think the thing about music is that its rights system is a little bit more controlled. So we haven't seen this as much in the image space because the rights aren't as controlled as they are with music. So.
And just following on from that, and this is a question to everyone again, is I mean, do we think that legal frameworks need to change a great deal, and relatedly, do we think they will, or will things be entrenched? Whoever wants the mic.
I think absolutely. I mean, the generative stuff, we're dealing with a full-blown communication revolution like we haven't seen it in 120 years. And we know from experiential industrial revolution stories what happened then in terms of the invention of copyright. Copyright as it stands today, I mean, I've lived a life as a starving artist for a couple of years. I think artists must be compensated fairly, rights must be treated, and so forth. This is very true. But copyright as it stands today actually is a tilted game. It's a mafia game. It is for big corporations, by big corporations, really set up. If you look at the music market where 60% of the catalog is owned by UMG and the likes, this situation is actually made for them. So I think we need to kind of be careful that we dissect the discussion around copyright for starving artists, for small artists, for independent players, and for mega corporations, which is a different story in some regard. The second point, I think, is that if you look at generative models version 2, 3, 4 in the next couple of years, where the quality will go a little bit up and a little bit up, and it will become ubiquitously accessible, you're dealing essentially with an explosion in the amount of content, the amount of spam as well, and the accessibility will go dramatically up so that essentially anybody can express themselves musically or in any multimodal form. The idea that we are still in a mode where we are actually fetishizing artifacts, which is a 20th century pattern, I think is ludicrous. As you're living in an era where artifacts will be completely omnipresent all around. So it's a different problem. It will be curation, which is the problem, not, this is my little artifact when you have 1 trillion artifacts that come out per day. So the model will change, I think, inevitably, and business model will catch up. We're at the very beginning of that, and people think, oh, we can patch this up through blockchains or something like that, but this is actually artificial scarcity models, this is not the kind of modus operandi we're walking into. So it's a very complex situation, a nuanced situation that goes way beyond music. It really will touch the entirety of media production, especially this will become evident as multimodal models become operationalized in the years to come.
That was very interesting. A thought came to mind. I mean, to say that an artifact is kind of an over subscription to the idea that this is very special when there are easily 300,000 of them. But if we look at a piece of music that has been composed carefully and are all, I wouldn't say that all the 300,000 are equally good. That's right. And there are some that are better than others, and perhaps a very small number that are very special. So how would you, I wouldn't say that the 300,000 can be considered equal, right? So how would you characterize the space?
As extremely fluent, as extremely transient. So a practical example is, and this is something you can do today, you can train a model on a voice. Let's take a famous singer. And you have this model that is a clear copyright infringement. And if you put it out, the lawyers will come. But what you can do is you can walk 10% in latent space in another direction, like in your own voice's direction. And so we've got a voice now which is Britney Spears, but 10% different. Or we walk at 15% or 25%. At which point does it become an infringement? And this is a voice example, but it's very much possible with not today's model per se. It's still buggy and work in progress, but we're getting to a situation where you can take a famous song and outpaint on it. And again, it's the same thing. Like if I walk 15% in latent space in one direction, is it enough of modification to still be unique? Or if I take 6 of these songs and I generate out of that, what's the reality of that? So it's what I'm trying to get at. It's a very complex and nuanced landscape that I'm seeing evolve, and yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking back also about the composer Bach. I mean, he plagiarized himself. He wrote many pieces that were very similar. So, was that, if each one of them were by a different person, would that be considered copyright infringement, do you think?
It's a good question, especially since copyright didn't exist at Bach's day. Yeah, so it's something that only can exist when recorded music came online, right? Before it was actually process-centric in many regards, which has a different type of business and cultural logic attached to it to a certain degree. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very good question. What do you think?
I think in that case, I wouldn't consider it copyright infringement of himself. He was creating new works, and they had, in my view, they had different characters and had a different vision. So, in that case, I think that would. They have their own right to existence.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Go right.
There's also quite a big question about, what part of the song is copyrightable. It's really not a black and white situation. So with the recent case with Ed Sheeran, for example, he had the same chord progression as Marvin Gaye's song, I think it was. And, that was basically the whole case. It's like, it's the same chord progression. And that's a chord progression that is actually used in that particular style.
So just to interrupt, Brian, your volume level is kind of going up and down. I don't know if it's at your end or at ours. I don't
Sorry,
know.
it's sometimes these headphones slip out of place.
That's way better. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Rewind a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I was just saying that, there's a big question about what part of music is copyrightable and what constitutes copyright infringement. So in the recent Ed Sheeran case, he had the same chord progression as a Marvin Gaye song, I believe it was. And, they threw the case out because that chord progression was a very common chord progression. So there's sort of this concept of like, okay, how common are these elements? Are these really unique? And that sort of goes back to this idea of artifacts. But the other concept around artifacts is that these artifacts, we sort of assume that music is this static artifact, right? And so with AI, there's going to be dynamic artifacts where you're not just, like, you won't actually be able to use the same fingerprinting methods, for example. And that's something that we struggle with because we generate infinite streams of music. So how are you going to fingerprint an infinite stream of music against another infinite stream of music? First of all, the odds that they're exactly the same are zero, essentially. But then second of all, they're so long that it wouldn't even make sense technologically. So I think what I see is maybe we move back a level in terms of what we consider an artifact, and maybe we just try to track the production of these elements, and that's sort of what we do at Infinite Album, is sort of track, like, okay, what were the inputs to the system? And so if you have control over, like, all the training data inputs, or, composer inputs, production inputs, our own AI engine, all this stuff, then you actually can track it, and it becomes potentially a revenue stream that currently is unachievable. Because it's separate from copyright and it's not going to be processed by the royalty processing companies. So I think that definitely will be shifting, is our idea of static versus dynamic content.
Okay, that's a very interesting thought. Right. Come back to that. I wanted to keep things moving along with another dodgy segue, and to a comment that Samim made a while ago on Twitter, which got me really interested, which I think everyone's thought the same thing. We're seeing the cost of production of music reducing, and there's a thread across all of post-capitalism that the cost of production of things starts to fall to zero, and that has big impacts on how we value things, and it has big impacts on how we might reconsider, reevaluate rights and royalties. But I wanted to interrogate that and open that discussion up. So firstly, does this kind of technology actually lead to the reduction of the cost of production? The alternative being that because we become, with any creative practice, we become increasingly detail focused. So, we might find new things to occupy our time in the process of creating music, and the cost of production doesn't actually fall. And then even if it does, to your point earlier that we are facing a tidal wave of music, well, we already inhabit, and we have for many years, more music than anyone could possibly consume or handle. And a massive long tail of amateur production. It's always been the case. So I don't exactly know what my question is, but I think my question is there's this natural conclusion that music's going to be radically transformed by AI for these reasons. Is it possible that that's actually just not true, and that things would be much the same in however many years' time for whoever? I guess I'm looking at Samim first.
And this is something Samim and I have talked about, that the media synthesis technologies seems to be leading to like a communication revolution, where media content creation becomes as ubiquitous as talking. And if you just look at the evolution of talking, maybe you can predict what music and image synthesis will be like. So talking, probably way back when, the only person in your tribe that could talk was the wizard master of the universe and could get everyone to follow them. Now that everyone talks, nearly, it's our basis of communication. And yeah, there's way more talking happening than anyone can keep up with, and that's okay, because it's not about talking to everybody. It's about talking one-on-one. So now with media synthesis, with music generation, maybe the shift is less from trying to be a superstar, music for everybody. Maybe it's about music for one person. Why not spend a weekend, make a song for your best friend, just for them. And yeah, lots of people talk. Some people are amazing at talking, and they get paid a lot of money because they're the best at talking. So there's still that.
I think that's an excellent point. I think I like to think about this on three levels. When it comes to music, there's the product, the artifact. There's the process, and then there's the presence of the artist. And traditionally, the last 100 years, we would devalue the process and the presence of the artist, and really focus on the artifact, the product. The product itself, I believe we're going into an era, to your point, that we're already living in media abundance. This is true, but it's not computational media. What I think we're moving into is essentially information security, black hat type of hacking mentality applied to music production and distribution on one level. We see it already, Boomi, spam generator, Muzak generators. You weaponize that and you see what's coming in 5 years. Information security behavior, so the whole gamut from virus creation to system hacking and so forth and so on. That type of mentality, that type of approach to things, DDoS attacks and so forth, flooding Spotify with 1 trillion songs just to kill the recommender system, all that kind of logic. We're seeing that sort of play out. Boomi is the first horrible example of that. So I think the situation on the product side of this equation is collapsing quickly, rapidly, and horribly. And there's not much we can do. Actually, UMG, the big ones, Google, etc., actually putting gasoline into that fire, trying to essentially put a horrible copyright regime on top of that dumpster fire. My personal hope is that we can reevaluate towards process and artist presence as really the unique thing, which you can't really commoditize as quickly, and is actually, for me, traditionally in music, as a fan, much more interesting. I follow artists. I like their presence. I like what they stand for. And I subscribe to that much more than the stuff they produce. And usually they're multimedia people, they produce thoughts, music, and so forth, and process. The thing that got me interested in music is the realization that I can do it as well. And I listened to this amazing guitar player as a kid, and I'm like, oh, I could do this as well. Obviously not at that level, but it's inspiration. I have 2 kids now, and it's exactly what that gets them, me together with them excited in music. It's a communication device. So my hope on optimistic days that we can reevaluate this equation and give more emphasis to process and presence of the artist and let that dumpster fire of an artifact-centric thing from the 20th century just degrade and disappear in the next 15 years. That on a good day. On a bad day, I think we're into for a really horrible time, because you can essentially, psyops and infosec people to death with generated media, which is happening. Where the conclusion will be that in 5 years we'll essentially have the birth of wireheading as the new dominant media form. So addiction in music will be really elevated to a completely different level when you have, RLHF and so forth, as you call it, PF and so forth. So, if you can generate music that is completely to your pleasure center, and probably it's going to be multimodal, but let's say just music, it becomes an addictive force and so forth. So it's going to degenerate a bit in that regard, but I think, presence and process are wonderful things that we should value very highly.
Yeah, I like that very much. But I'm going to play the devil's advocate and ask, what if one day we can have 300,000 artists with 300,000 equally good processes and presence, and this originally the artifact was too special. We're doing away with that because we can now make the hundreds of thousands of them. What if one day we can make hundreds and thousands of personas, and then where does that take us?
Artificial artists, that kind of line of thinking. Sure, and we've got Kyoto Data in Japan since 15 years in the charts and stuff. I mean, it's been going on. People fall. There's a psychological phenomenon. It's on Wikipedia. People fall in love with cars, and this is sexual love. Like they will have a sexual relationship with cars. There's a subsegment of people that do that. That's obviously going to explode with androids and whatever. But I think the discussion is it's maybe 10 years down the line where that really becomes a radical thing, and it's very hard to reason about anything that is more than 2 years down the line. So I'm not sure. I would agree that it's a very interesting outlook. I'm sure you have good thoughts on artificial artists and so forth.
Zach and I have always joked that we would create this thing called the black wall, and behind the black wall would be bots making music for bots with fake audiences, fake critics, the whole thing just automated, going off on its own tangent, becoming itself for itself, with not necessarily many human listeners at all listening to that. And what would arrive at the end of that process? I don't know, but it begs the question.
A lot of CO2 emissions.
And I also like the idea of creating music for one person. That's really nice, and it actually reflects a movement in medicine to personalize medicine, to actually direct. If you think of music as medicine, direct a prescription to one individual. So that's very cool.
I absolutely love this line of research. I think this is probably one of the most optimistic outcomes, where we have personalized music, which I mentioned wireheading, but the positive aspect of that would be tailored to your, kind of psychology, biology, etc. With yourself being able to tilt the objective function towards your personal health goals and so forth. Obviously, the flip side of exactly the same technology is mind control, but that's a different story.
I would actually disagree that it's been entirely about artifacts over the last few decades. I think obviously we built this system to try to figure out how to monetize and design rights, and yes, that system is not very great. I think we're everybody's realized that streaming is not a great compensation system for artists for the last, since the last 5-10 years. But I think the thing that motivates people, if you have just a song that is maybe the greatest song ever, but there's no persona behind it, I feel like that actually reduces the meaning in that song. If there's no artist behind that, for example, there could be a song that was fantastic but had no artist behind that. I think that does reduce meaning for a lot of people. So I think that those artists that have been able to reach a ton of people and have that presence that's attractive to a ton of people have been really successful with this system. So I wouldn't say that it was all about artifacts. I definitely would say that the artist's presence was pretty key to that. And what I see happening in the future is that they'll be able to reinforce that relationship with their fans, where they don't have to give them an artifact, but they give them something that they can personalize, like you were saying. So you can create your own version of a grime song, for example, that's tailored to your preferences, or tailored to the preferences of the group of people that you game with, for example. So you can play that track while you're gaming together and interact with it as you're gaming, which is sort of what we're focused on. So I definitely have had that same thought. I love the analogy of talking, because I had that same thought of just little microcosms of people who are like generating a movie and then watching a movie together, and then that movie's gone forever. I love that idea. And I think that'll be definitely something that the next generations will be doing.
So did you have one more?
Yeah.
Go on.
The thought of something that's generated once and gone forever, I mean, it's romantic, but I mean, that's the work of Lisa Margulis that shows that we like repetition. So how to have that persistence to salve our psyches could be then a problem. I mean, the problem of having again 300,000. I mean, just for lack of to keep the theme, is that it's very hard to hold on to the thought of 300,000 pieces. I mean, even if we think of Bach inventions, we can hold 3 threads of melodies. Once it gets to 6, it gets very difficult. And so...
I know you just seen that a lot in last year, the AI Song Contest. I think there might have been 300,000 songs in now.
Anyways, that was just a thought.
I would definitely say that there's something about ephemeral live performance moments that you can, it's obviously contextual. It's more than just the musical content that makes the moment so special, and it's usually something goes wrong or whatever, the Keith Jarrett concert effect or whatever. I'm gonna attempt another appalling transition, but I would just to keep things moving on a little bit. And then this is going to be my last question, and then I really would like everyone, maybe not everyone at the same time, but this conversation to expand. And again, you don't have to ask questions like wild comments, or just throwing in your own view is really welcome. So I just to shift focus again a little bit, it strikes me that since a couple of years ago, we suddenly had lots of powerful text to image generators, and of course text continuators, and now we're seeing text to music, and I don't think the text to music stuff is that good. We're waiting to see what CJ is going to be putting out soon. I mean, I think they sound good, but I don't think they have a very powerful handle on translating the text description into the music description, and I'm perfectly convinced that's going to get great. I don't see any reason why that's just not going to get better and better. My question to everyone is text just the kind of end state interface for everything for the foreseeable future? We can get rid of all GUIs and everything else, and it's just all going to be text, and text as the glue between different modules in workflows and stuff like that. Is there something just about text that's going to become dominant because of its dominance in human interaction or whatever? And I'd like to actually direct that to Elaine in a roundabout way, because you're interested in musical representation, And I'm interested in what you think first up about how the language or the theories or the science that we use to describe music actually being something that's living and evolving and culturally dynamic, and your work is a part of that. Can we imagine a future where we talk in terms of pitch spirals with music AI, and there's something enlightening and expanding in that?
Okay, thank you. So I find it strange to use text to generate music, because we love music because it's not about words. It expresses things that are beyond words. It expresses feelings and concepts that without having to use words.
But then you
And
just say, give me something beyond words.
give me something beyond words. I perhaps when I've in my own work with representation, the representations have been mathematical, which again is an abstract concept. So it's trying to capture abstract ideas, which would, I mean, you could describe with words, but it's just not as efficient. And I think that it is useful to have representations that are also abstract. I mean, words, when you don't have those representations, could also work, but it seems like there's a gap between the meanings in the words and what we're hoping to achieve with the music.
I think beyond text input, at least for large models, like audio input, obviously, there's only so much language around music and audio, and using audio itself to make more audio, whether it's make more things like this, or fine-tune it on this, or this plus this minus this, or this, but to the absurd, is the obvious next progression. But like having multimodality is cool. Like having language as your input, language is the language we all speak. Right? And if you're gonna make a model with a classifier and say it's genre conditioned, you instead of just having these discrete predefined classes of genres, just open it up, just throw that tag into T5, and now you can type anything in there that doesn't exist. Type in kurzwellisk blob, and it's okay, what genre is that? It's gonna make something that's actually pretty cool. And to tie it back to ephemerality, most of the works of art we experience in our life are ephemeral, like dinner parties and hangouts and dates, even our own lives themselves. Improv jams, and media synthesis adds something to that. For example, I was just in a bar the other day, and we were playing a card game, and all these people that weren't friends were suddenly all laughing together playing this card game. We started changing the rules. Okay, what if this happens? What if this happens? It's okay, new rule. Whenever someone comes up with a phrase, then we'll mid-journey it, and then that becomes part of the game. And because mid-journey generates really fast, now this is part of this game now, image generation. So that's another reason why text prompting is helpful, because it interfaces with the other ways that we play in a nice way. And now music can do that too.
Yeah. Midjourney is an interesting one because actually it's not a text interface. At the surface it is, but Midjourney is actually an exercise in distributed training of a couple million people that constrain the latent space. So it's actually, the objective function is the interface in many ways. And I think we will see in the next months and years from HCI and so forth, methods where we can guide the objective function directly. Obviously, fine-tuning, LoRa's, etc. First stab at that, dream booths, etc. So that's one aspect. think the other aspect is, which is important, is about 90% of music that humanity consumes today is not from the music industry. It's functional music. It's in movies. It's in ads. It's in the background, wherever. That is actually the vast majority. And we have to really be cognizant that different use cases require different interfaces. And I'll use the most horrible example because it's late capitalism and so advertising. In advertising, I think the appropriate interface is profit maximization. That's what they're after with the music. And so what these people are interested in is defining a set of rules as objectively as possible and driving the music generation as personalized as possible to then objectively measure how much profit that comes out. It's a horrible use case, but it's a giant industry, that one. And so they will require a different set of interfaces than, let's say, Bach writing, again, actually in text, score, right? That is actually text. So it's nuanced. For the creative use case, which I think many here really care about deeply, myself included, full body interfaces are on the horizon. So the journey is quite clear where it's going. The early research is quite conclusive. It will be BCI. We're rapidly moving into BCI interfaces. We can decode what people think about music in terms of diffusion models and so forth that are guided by BCI inputs and so forth. And it will happen quicker than we think. It's the early signs are there. There's no reason why it wouldn't scale. And so it will be full body input. And possibly further down the line, two-way communications. It's kind of clear where Mr. Musk and his people are walking to there. Which, you know, we can think about whatever we like. Yeah, so it's the interface text is transient. It's really useful, I agree. I really like it in conjunction with outpainting. In my personal generative practice, I use examples. I use fine tunes plus text. So I have a model where I gave it 6 jazz songs and 4 funk songs, and then I prompt on top of that, and I have mirror features to guide the stuff, and then you get interesting stuff. And actually being able to rapidly, for an artist to go in there and say, I need these mirror features that I want to use, and I'm going to use these 6 examples, and try to fine tune and hack together my own kind of way of tilting the objective function is super powerful, as you know from your artistic practice. So. In the meantime, I mean, people that just go to music gen and use just the text thing, it's pure garbage that comes out, in my opinion. It's literally the worst type of music I've ever heard. If you want to bore somebody to death, that's how to do it, which is an art form in some way, but yeah.
Airport music. It's interesting. I mean, the way that you have used the word text is, I mean, as in writing, so a score is text. And the way the CJ has used, I shouldn't be speaking when he isn't here, but the way the CJ has used the word text in his case was to actually define the constraints. So within this genre mixed with that genre. So it in effect is kind of an abstract concept. I guess I'm trying to sort of get words around it. How I'm thinking of words describing music is that music is able to express so much more than words. And if it can express so much more than words, it's very hard to then describe it fully with words. So that, I guess, yeah, that's... I did say that with words. Okay.
I kind of thought your comment about the future is definitely in BCI provocative enough that I wanted to see if anyone wanted to jump in with comments about that or anything else. And so, oh, you've got an... Hang on. Well, okay, I want to... So I'm really inviting hands up, but while I don't see any, I'm going to ask one more question to Ryan about text, and of course, Elaine, you can have the mic back. But one more. So Ryan, I mean, I don't know a great deal about the nuts and bolts of your system, although I've got my ex-PhD student Stefan now as a spy in your organisation. But I guess you're facing, like many startups and commercial AI initiatives, you're facing a situation where you're banking on certain designs and technologies whilst looking out your window and sort of seeing how rapidly the pace of change is happening. And so I guess just to keep the question about text, I'm wondering, just back to that point about whether, I'm just reflecting on the fact that in the recent projects I've done, I've just constantly gone, oh wow, you can just use GPT to sort of glue this thing to this thing, and it just does become this incredibly seductive, and even if it's not the best design, it's just an incredibly rapid and freeform space that we can work in. Is that something you're finding? And more generally, are you finding that there are huge risks in your sort of investment in APIs and libraries and stuff that might rapidly be displaced by other technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for reminding me. Yeah, no, it definitely is an incredible pace that we're witnessing now with all how these are all developed. I think still with text to music, there really is not a lot of long-form structure. They still haven't really solved that problem. So you can get a nice sample that's like, a few seconds long, maybe, but then for the most part, from what I've heard, it doesn't really translate into turning it into an actual song. With that said, that's not really our goal at Infinite Album, because we are designed to be functional music, like Samin was saying. So we did design our interface explicitly for that purpose. So when you generate a song with Infinite Album, all you have to do is choose a style and choose an emotion, a starting emotion point. And then at any time while you're playing the stream, you can change the emotion point, or you can change the style, or whatever you want. But the main parameters are really just style and emotion. We do have these, artifacts, which are sort of infinite songs that we call vibes, which also just accentuates really what their purpose is, which is to set the tone of a stream. So when gamers are gaming, we've targeted streamers on Twitch, first of all, with our first product, and they use this to support the game that they're playing. They often play the music relatively quiet, and they really just use it to control the mood of the stream. So they'll change the vibe, or they'll change the emotion when they, take a break and have like a screen that just says "be right back." Or if they stop playing the game and they start chatting, maybe they'll change the style from like a rock style to like an ambient style, for example. I think we have a little bit of a moat in terms of our technology, because we do everything in real time and because everything is actually embeddable inside the video game. So we built a Unity plugin where you can actually put it inside the game. And so, if somebody wants to create a deep learning model that generates audio and try to get it to run on a mobile device inside of a video game, then more power to them. But so we've got a little bit, at least like 6 months, I would say, before somebody figures that out. But yeah, I think eventually, definitely the audio generation tech will get there, where they can say, give me this emotion, give me this style, give me 3 minutes. But then to make it dynamic, where you're constantly changing the emotional input, that would be challenging, I would say. And additionally, we can do really fun things. Like I think we have an opportunity that is really unique, where people can actually communicate via the changes in the music. So if a gamer is not paying attention and they die for some stupid reason, one of the viewers could actually change the music. So we've integrated with Twitch, so the viewers can actually change the music of the stream that they're watching. So the viewer can change the music to like kids music or something like that, for example, if the streamer dies and is not paying attention. We also have things like, you can add cowbell, you can add your own instruments. So we have add cowbell as our first one, which is great. And you can set up these mappings where, like, if I created this mapping when I was testing the other day, where every time you killed someone, it would add an extra cowbell to the stream. So we can do really specific creative and fun things that it would be hard to do if you were trying to supplant that with like a deep learning model, because you sort of have to know what's going on in the mix. You have to know what's going on with the arrangement and with the underlying, harmony and stuff like that. So I think we have an advantage there for sure.
Yeah, structured templated approach is still going to go strong for a long time. Right, where are all these hands up? Thor, I was going to say, Thor promised that there was going to be a lot of talkative people, so it's... Well, I think we're just going to have to pass this mic around. So I think if we just take the time to pass the mic, that's the safest bet.
Okay, so I was just wondering about how you feel. No, there's a certain change in music technology. I mean, most of us have been doing music technology for decades, and what people, when we present our work, it's normally like, wow, that's awesome, or cool technology, or people are indifferent, or they think it's crazy. But I'm noticing a slightly different reception to the work that people are doing when they're working with music and AI. There's a certain anger that sometimes comes up in people, there's a certain kind of, but shit, this music is awful, and this is not, good music. And in a way that was totally different when we just made some generative systems or some crazy synthesizers or something. And I wonder why that is. Is it because you're using their data and that people feel cheated in some way? Or is it because we have this concept of AI, that it's supposed to be intelligent and we're a bit disappointed that it's not making fantastic music? Where does the anger come from? And am I right? Do you feel that anger, or am I just imagining it?
I think that's for you.
I think whenever an art form conjures up anger in people, that means that art form is really alive, right? It is not some boring thing in the background of people's lives. It is actually activating the amygdala, and isn't that awesome? And I think you highlighted two ways that people do get angry, and more so lately than ever. One way is that it's a challenge, that it's something that's trying to replace me. And I feel like that became extreme, more in the mainstream consciousness because of its association with AI. Like, we have now called it AI. I remember there was always this resistance to like machine learning, like no one's gonna call it, we shouldn't call it AI, but AI is like what people think of sci-fi movies. But now it's like, it's linked. So it's all those feelings from all those sci-fi movies and TV shows and books, now all in this art form, and that is now coming up with this like no robot can do it better than me, kind of feeling, which it's like, I think instead of being like, no, it's not gonna replace, no, I think we should lean into it. Be like, oh yeah? Well, step up, let's see if this is better. And the other side that you mentioned, Thor, was that it's not meeting expectations. And I think that is even more directly a result of even calling it AI. Instead of just, I don't know, we were originally calling it neural synthesis. It's like synthesis with the neural net, and let's hear what it sounds like for itself. And it's just like statistics on steroids. And like, it sounds cool. It's not trying to be intelligent. But I think the problem now, like a lot of listeners, the majority of like people coming at it from the mainstream, they have this lens of like, I'm supposed to be wowed by the cognitive abilities of this music. And then it just disappoints. And so that now they have a certain anger, a certain, frustration, or I'm gonna diss it kind of feeling. And I see this in YouTube comments everywhere. Like some artist just trying to explore a new timbre palette using neural nets, and then YouTube comments are like, "This isn't intelligent." It's like, well, it's not supposed to be like. That's not what this is. And I think just reinforcing the term neural synthesis in your work may train people out of that? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I fully agree. I think excellent points. I think on one level, people should be pissed off. Like, they're not pissed off enough. In the US, you've got 6 corporations that own 95% of media. Like, full stop. This shit is foul. Like, it's bad. And actually, what some of this stuff represents is just a hyper concentration. Like, you have 2 corporations soon that own like a giant neural net and just generate the whole, Spotify essentially. And they'll have armies of lawyers that get anybody else out, and they monopolize GPUs to keep everybody out. I mean, that's what's unfolding right now, and I think people are not pissed off enough. It has nothing to do with AI. This is pure capitalism. It's just a new tool to kind of exploit everybody much more efficiently. And I think that thing should be, we should be angry, we should fight it. Open source is our best bet in some regards. I think thinking that the legal system will help us with this stuff is completely illusionary, because it's a rigged game and they have all the lawyers. So people should be pissed off, like big time. But the answer obviously is not saying, oh my God, I'm pissed off without an outlet for that anger. It should be channeled. So my approach would be, give the people the means of production, give them the tools. Let's have an open source discussion around this. I don't care about copyright. What I care about is distribute the means of production there. Give people actually access to set their own business rules on top of that stuff, to make their own mistakes, to, there shouldn't be one business model that rules them all here. And so forth. So yeah, more anger, but productively channeled.
I don't really know what to say here. I would really like to hear from the floor to see what people think of this. I have experienced intense anger about the fact that I'm using technology to describe music.
You mean other people's anger towards you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not your own anger?
No, not my own anger. Yes.
I had something to add as well.
Yeah, I'll move the mic.
Yeah, we actually had this experience pretty recently. We did like a soft launch of our product, and one of the partners that did an integration with us announced that they're supporting AI-generated music for gaming. And there was this whole backlash on Twitter that everybody was disappointed and they were going to move away from that tool and whatnot. So we had to go on this campaign explaining that we don't use rights without consent. We don't use people's art without consent. And then people were sort of satiated a little bit. So I think definitely right now everybody considers AI to be this thing that is infringing on many people's rights to sort of circumvent having to compensate those artists. But what was ironic, I think, about that one was, one of the people responded and they're like, I only use copyright, musicians that create copyright-free music, and I'm at least giving them exposure, and then I donate to them every once in a while. And if we think of that, exposure and people donating to artists, that's not a viable model for any artist to live on either. So I think some of the anger is a little bit misdirected, because yes, I think it will take away some jobs in the arts space, but I think we really need to reconsider how we expect artists to make a living, because that system is pretty flawed at the moment as well. So I don't think AI, it's kicking a dog when it's down kind of thing. And then to your other point, there was this amazing quote, a little video quote from York when, samplers and electronic music came out, and somebody had said that electronic music has no soul. And York was like, well, of course, the machine doesn't have a soul. Like, if the music doesn't have soul, then a human didn't put their soul into the music to make it have a soul. So, there's not AI-generated music will be a wide range of things, or music that has used AI is a wide range. And the quality of the outcome of the music will depend on, you know, the human who created it and their tastes and their skills. So yeah, I think that AI probably will not be a taste maker, but it's the same thing. Somebody using AI will create new genres, will create, you know, completely new ideas that nobody had ever thought of before.
Cheers, Ollie. I just wanted to circle back to this means of production thing and who owns what, particularly given the extent to which these foundational models, huge models, are driving everything at the moment. And I've been very much enjoying Cory Doctorow's sort of stuff that he's been doing about enshittification. I don't know if any of the panel have come across this idea, but it's the argument that platform capitalism in particular is very susceptible to a dynamic where it suddenly stops acting in the interest of the betterment of its product and then starts actively seeking ways to achieve lock-in to the detriment of its users and its suppliers. And given the pattern so far with the way that say Google has behaved with its other products and the other big people, did the panel feel there's really any cause for optimism that these big players will continue to give you guys the latitude to be as playful as you currently are, or they'll start seeking to lock you in and make it impossible to move to a different chipset or to take your model elsewhere?
Oh, I have to bring the mic down to you guys. Oh no, I was going to stay up here. I'm getting a workout today, guys. Woo. Let's go back to CJ.
We seem to be, sometimes it seems to me like we're in this remarkable state of a prisoner's dilemma, where there are, like the big tech giants, they are releasing stuff open, some of it, and it's like a perpetual cycle of, like, coming from academic research, this, like, yeah, obviously PhDs write a paper, write a thesis, we all share the knowledge. Then now going into Google and other companies, this trend's still continuing, and everyone benefiting from that, from papers and from code that we can all run. It's like when it goes well, it's like I feel optimistic in the ways in which it's like a prisoner's dilemma that's like winning, but like also can be pessimistic that like a single player can just choose to, you know what, forget it. I'm going full on proprietary. Like, I have the most resources, and like, see you guys later. And that also happens in prisoner's dilemma, like, simulations. So that could happen. Yeah, what do you guys think?
I'm a open source believer. You have to kind of ask yourself what comes after the collapse of capitalism at this point, especially kind of at this highly weird position where you have open source being the mitigation of geopolitical tensions. China will use open source because they can't access the closed source stuff anymore, and so forth, from the chip level up to the software level. And the walls between corporations have become very thin now. The reason why Meta, Google, etc. are still publishing large amounts of open source is sort of unprecedented, actually, because they have to. It goes back to your prisoner's dilemma point, otherwise they will be irrelevant. I think the dynamism in open source is tremendous right now. It's a cultural force we haven't seen in a long time, if not ever. And it might be actually connected to that IP question, that we are entering the post-IP world where collaborative production, sharing, and so forth actually trump this kind of scarcity game that we've been playing. So I'm being an optimist here. Obviously, all could go sideways, but I do hope this is how it's panning out. The second part being distributed training. It's actually technically figured out at this point. There is startups in the space, there's open source plays and so forth. And if you start to stipulate that we put an open sharing agreement for data sharing on top of that, you could do right now large scale, internet scale distributed training if you get the incentives right, etc. It's still a long way off, but it's panning out that it's at least a possibility, and at that point you could train tremendous base models with 500,000 people. So that's the second aspect there.
I don't think I have much more to add. So.
Well, actually, we've got a queue now. People have piped up. So I'm going to let 3 people from the floor speak in succession, and then we can jump back to the panel.
Before my question, I have a correction. Earlier on, it was stated that Bach did his stuff before the onset of copyright. But in fact, not only did Bach own copyright in his songs, he was actually one of the earliest examples of someone who was involved in a copyright lawsuit. So Bach, he's the notable example of that. My question actually is with regard to this. Much of this conference, of course, much of the discussion here has largely been in the as an artificial intelligence professor, I would call the look ma no hands period of use of deep learning technologies and transformer architectures and things like this in music, where it's right now it's the cool tools that musicians can use to be able to do interesting and fun, cool things. But very soon it's going to move from that to cool opportunities for A&R men to eliminate musicians entirely. Unless you think that's not the case, right now the Hollywood writers' strike has basically got 3 stumbling blocks it's about, and one of those is exactly that with regard to writers, requiring clauses that prevent corporations from doing that. It's going to happen for musicians as well. Especially given the fact, the thing that really spooks me is that the writers have a union. And musicians famously, among all other artists in all of their genres, are extremely weak compared to the corporations and organizations that employ them. They are in a very, very, very weak position. How do you propose that we prevent these techniques from essentially disenfranchising musicians and disempowering them in a really, really big way 5 years from now?
I was going to hand it to the next person on the floor, but do we want the panel to answer that, or shall I move on? Yeah, we want the panel to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, that's comments.
Go, Ryan.
I think functional. Yeah, sorry. I think functional music is in trouble for sure, because it's not super inspiring, and when the focus isn't to entertain people, like only with the music, then it's easier to simulate, I would say. Yeah, I think I don't know if there is any way to prevent that from happening at this point already, to be honest. It feels almost like the cat's out of the box a little bit already. Yeah, in terms of, it sort of goes back to the whole, some memes, dystopian collapse of capitalism commentary. Is writing functional music as a full-time career the best use of an artist's time and resources? It'd be ideal if there was a world where they could earn a living, not pursuing their own, original music that they don't just tailor to an ad or tailor to a video. But yeah, I don't really have a solution other than that. I see that there will be some disenfranchisement by the use of AI, and maybe the one solution is to create a label that collects training data from thousands of working musicians and leverages that to compete at the same level so they could create your essentially camping the join approach. That would be my only suggestion.
Right. CJ, did you want to come back on that point? Sure.
Putting on hold to the side my feeling that the music industry isn't it's just a blip in time and isn't the end all be all for music. But your question is like, basically, imagine if all the major labels had realized that they could just fire all their artists and use generated facsimiles of them in perpetuity and continue on the business that way. How would the rest of us react and try to rebalance that power shift? Which is a great question, and I think the next question is, what do those groups have a monopoly over, besides just the copyrights? They also have the means of distribution, communication, worldwide broadcast, and large live experiences, and the relationships to do that. So if that's the thing that might continue that power to continue even with no artists involved, then it is our duty to instead rebuild those things grassroots, independent, to the level that they have. And I think the internet itself is a step there. Seeing examples of independent artists make it on the global scene is good evidence that it's possible. And yeah, what else do we have to do? And it's about making independent and making
comes from the development of video games the last 30 years. It seems like we're, as humanity, moving into multimodal experiences with a high level of experiences. If you look at anybody under the age of 30, essentially, they're all brought in essentially into multimedia experiences. It's not just music, it's music, stories, merch, what have you. I mean, I'm talking about the mainstream here, not about my weird passion for jazz or something. But about 80% of the market that would actually be the ones that would be eliminated in your scenario. And so for them, I think you're already actually looking at a much richer landscape. It's as you mentioned, it's touring, it's a whole host of different experiences there, and I think that actually will escalate. It's not an easy story to completely end-to-end automate that entire stack. That's kind of my statement there.
Well, you have seen Hatsune Miku.
I have, and it gives me a lot of hope. I'll give you the counterexample, K-pop. So K-pop is I'm obsessed with K-pop, not for musical quality reasons, but it's the first industry that does data-driven end-to-end automation at a scale that we've never seen ever. They have essentially mastered the art of having 200-300 people per release that does complete end-to-end data-driven analytical music experience production. It's much more than music with these guys. And that's kind of Hatsune Miku 2.0, but they're quite smart. They talk not about automation but about augmentation, because kind of it gets them much quicker there in terms of their profit goals and what's a forth.
I was thinking that one way to slow the tide is education. I think being able to recognize the kind of skill and training it takes to produce an artwork, and to be able to recognize the quality versus a mass production. Like you say, AI models will get better over time. So that may slow the tide, but then again, I thought, well, is it good to have this hierarchy of elitism? Maybe we don't want it. I don't know. We do want it, or we don't want it. We do want it because we want to be able to recognize value and high quality. But at the same time, that may also shut out people who do not have the means or the access to resources to learn that. So that's simply a societal issue. Yeah.
Right, I'm going to take it back to the queue. Try not to trip over.
Thanks very much. I'm not sure now which question to ask, but I'm glad that Ryan emphasized again the difference between functional music and, let's say, pop music and art music, you know, like intentionally made music to be listened to. Because I think that when we don't make that distinction, that's what makes people angry about the suggestion that AI is going to solve one case or the other. But if we take for granted that AI can solve the composition of functional music, that's a kind of democratization of the tools to make music. But is it a democratization that actually helps anyone? Because rather than like elevating the long, flat tail of music makers, that sounds like by putting them all on equal footing, it actually just concentrates the value of making functional music in the hands of corporations who can, you know, spend $1 million on Spotify ads to get people to listen to that music. Yeah. So is anyone worried about, I guess this comes kind of to the enshittification problem too. Does anyone worry about the negative impact of democratizing the creation of functional music? And maybe separately, do you actually think it's possible to democratize the creation of non-functional music, like good music?
I have to make a chair's call here, and I'm gonna stick with the queue. So hold that thought while I go all the way around. Feel like I'm on a TV show. Over to you.
Thanks, Ali. Sorry. More just a comment, actually, and sorry, it's bringing it back a bit to Thor's original question around the anger that some people have shown in relation to AI-generated music. And I agree with all the reasons that have been said, obviously, about capitalism and being replaced. And obviously, it's the industry panel, so that completely makes sense. But I kind of wanted to comment, I think, for some people, I think as well, it goes a little bit deeper than that. Like, for instance, for people who aren't looking to make money off it, like the argument that happened on the session, which is the Irish thread, like that got really angry and it got really upset. And I think there possibly is the possibility as well that for many people, music is very personal. It's very human. As Ryan says, it comes from somebody with a soul. So this idea that we can be told, oh, do you know what, an AI can do that, removes that, to say that that can be replaced, I think for some people fills them with not just anger, but abject terror that, the AI can make that jump. And I think that fear can lead to such an emotional response as well and such an anger. Sorry, just a comment.
And I'm going to keep going. There was one more comment, and I think we might leave the last word. You get the last word?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wonder about whether it's a clear dichotomy between art music and functional music. Radio 3 has a program where they play soundtracks from games, and they're playing those as art music. So I think to me, that's a false dichotomy, really.
It's a great point. Well, we're 4 minutes to go, and I'm sure everyone is dying for a drink after 2 hours of intense debate. about industry music. So I don't know how guilty I feel about cutting off the discussion there when there could be just like the absolute most choice final insight from our panel. But I think we should pause there and thank our panel and all of the contributors. Thank you so much. And I guess I'll hand it back to someone here. Chris.
Hi. So, still plenty to go today. So, Jack Armitage's installation is ready for visitors in the meeting house right now, and that's open till 7 o'clock this evening. We've also, right now, got a drinks reception, which is up in the Arts B quad. So if you go up these stairs and cross over to the next building and go through, there's a kind of quad area with some sheltered space because it's raining. If you go to the right-hand side, just before you go out to the quad, that's where all the wine is. And at 8:30, we've got the final concert. So enjoy, and thanks to the panel again.